Good morning, good afternoon, good evening, and good night. Welcome to yet another, not live stream of consciousness, but live stream nonetheless. I'm very excited to introduce this year's Solapunk art collaboration. For those who aren't familiar, Solapunk is a genre, an aesthetic, and a movement that envisions vibrant, collective futures to inspire action in the present. It is what I would consider a connective term, a category perhaps, for the various ideas and practices that seek social justice and harmony with humanity, ecology, and our technology. Although I doubt you would not have heard of this concept before, as it is part of a lot of the videos that I've done on this channel, where I've given my interpretation and my take on the meaning of solarpunk and how it should be approached, how it could be approached. But of course, I acknowledge there are other approaches as well, and we invite those through these art collaborations. And in times like these, in the midst of all the various crises that dominate our news headlines, as we face climate crises and economic uncertainties and war, I believe that art can help us to imagine resilience. And I think having a vision to strive for as we act here now has become more valuable than ever. Past year's themes have included explorations of bioregions, learning, and labor. And now as we launch this year's art collab, the channel's fifth so far, allow me to introduce one of my favorite Imagineers in the Solapunk space, alxd. Pavel, welcome. Welcome. Hello.
Hello, can everybody hear me?
On my side, it looks so.
Okay. So, hello, I am alxd. I am the curator of the uh, Story Seed Library and one of the creators of the Solapunk prompts. And I'm so happy to show you what we prepared for this year.
As am I. As am I. Now, this year's theme is disaster preparedness, response, and relief. To give you a very quick description of the theme, even in the most optimistic scenarios of carbon neutrality, the 21st century will be full of climate disasters our civilization, culture, and infrastructure are not prepared for. Let's step away from clean, utopian, solarpunk worlds and roll our sleeves to face the consequences of our past. How can a better solarpunk world react to the coming disasters? How will our daily lives change? What new or repurposed infrastructure will keep us safe? What new traditions will we need to guide us? What stories will we tell ourselves to make sense of the world that is What stories will we tell ourselves to make sense of the world that has changed so much? Let's imagine more than just the rising waters, the droughts and fires, the sudden floods and pandemics, loss of infrastructure and supply chains we take for granted. Finally, for the disaster relief, how can we step away from our colonial habits and imagine giving the survivors agency instead of handouts? How can we empower communities to rebuild after a catastrophe, find solace in each other, and grieve those lost? I'm very excited to see how artists come together and think about these prompts, to think about these themes and concepts. Through art, we really want to highlight, for this collaboration, we really want to highlight how collaboration itself ties into our collective resilience, how non-hierarchical support systems can carry us through crises. We want this art collaboration to be a way of exploring what disaster preparedness even means. Because we can look at the sort of reactive approach to disaster preparedness, response, relief, or we can look at the proactive work as well. You know, community readiness, developing certain infrastructures, cooking outdoors, uh, learning plant identification and medicine practices, food preservation and storage, ham radio, first aid, basic sewing. These sorts of skills are very critical when the systems that we depend on succumb to crisis. And through the art, we don't want to focus solely on the crisis. We also want to connect it all to the hope of Solapunk. The ecological, decentralized solutions that Solapunk promises. And so once again, alxd has a lot to share on these points. If you haven't caught our last art collaboration announcement stream, I believe his world building notes in that stream proved invaluable, so you could go and check that out on my channel. But without further ado, Pavel, I want you to take the floor.
Thank you. If you could share the slides.
Yep, switching now. There you are.
Thank you. I hope everything will be moving. Please tell me if slides are not moving or you see any glitches. So for this collab, you will see less world building. I want to give you more examples. Uh, this is me, and within the story seed library and Solarpunk prompts, we already have quite a lot of stories, quite a lot of ways for you how you can start imagining a different world, how you can start imagining disasters and those Solarpunk worlds which are acknowledging the problems. But I wanted to tell you how I arrived at Solarpunk, how I found it, and why I needed it. Because I didn't come to the movement because I wanted just to imagine a better tomorrow. I wanted something to describe the world that I am seeing around, uh, and a language to make people notice what is happening around them. A few years ago at a hacker conference in Germany, I heard a story of people of Sierra Leone who, during the Ebola pandemic in 2014, were in an extremely dire situation because when everybody fled Sierra Leone, everybody who had the means, so most people that were working on the infrastructure, especially banking infrastructure, they lost the means to buy medicine. They lost any means to keep the hospitals stocked. They lost the means to pay the medical personnel, and they had no way of actually making sure that the doctors, the nurses, the medical workers will be fed. And it's the local people within Sierra Leone who decided that they will rewrite the banking system and create their own infrastructure so that people will be fed, that people will receive compensation for their work, and they will be able to buy food. And this is a story that really moved me. They realized that I cannot tell it to anyone around because people just don't believe that you can restart a banking system with some kind of community version of money. Uh, and it would work and it would start within weeks. And they realized that it's because we do not have the language to do it, which prompted me to look for movements that could imagine that. And Solarpunk was such a movement for me. That's why I started going deeper and deeper, and you will see that a lot of examples that I give you are examples of real movements that I've seen, or some work of people that I have directly worked with, and those are not just some things that would be nice to have. Those are things that happened. And we could be talking a lot about disasters, and but what I want you to acknowledge, that no matter which future we will land into, no matter how fast we'll get to carbon neutrality, we'll have a lot more disasters, and those will be extreme weather events. Those will be different military conflicts. Those will be supply chain uh, and breakages all around the world. And we can get into a better situation if we imagine how. But in every single possible world, we need to start preparing for living with those disasters or living in conditions that we are not used to. If we lose a lot of the uh, ocean currents that are currently there in the world, it may not be a direct weather event in like a singular one, but we would need to rebuild a lot of infrastructure in Europe, a lot of infrastructure uh, in multiple parts of the world, because it is just not prepared for that kind of weather. We need to start thinking about this. And I would like to us to imagine a solar punk future which acknowledges that. So every time somebody comes and asks me, hey, how does the solar punk future generate conflict? Where is there conflict if everything is so optimistic? Well, for me, this is the conflict. The world will be completely different. The world will be hostile to what we build, and we'll need to completely change our cultures, our infrastructures, how we relate to each other, and what tools we use in order to survive. So for me, this is the conflict that is ever present. And I want to show you how we can talk about it in Solarpunk, how we can incorporate that in our world building. So will be talking less about the symbols, the hieroglyphs, and so on. And I want to give you more examples. So the touchstones that we can take a look at are most importantly the real stories. The one I just told you about within Sierra Leone is described in the biggest essay I have on Solarpunk on my blog. But there are a lot other stories, and you will hear like if you only look around, there are so many stories which are not properly covered, not properly spread, which do not have those symbols that allow them to land in the popular culture. But we have so many stories of local resilience of communities. I will show you some books and some examples later, but this is your probably most important resource when working on this topic. The next one is actually showing the adversity, because the solar punk hope has any meaning only if it's shown within the adversity. We need to see people struggling. We need to see actual harm coming to communities, coming to people, and not in the gory way of celebrating that someone got hurt. But we need to see that the stakes are real, because only within this context, the hope, the rolling up your sleeves and doing something makes any sense. And this is the real value of solarpunk art, of acknowledging the struggle and showing that we can work and we can do something independently of the problems. And what is important, let's not think about it just as a disaster response, as something that happens when the disaster strikes. Because as the world will be changing, we will need to start living with the disasters. And we need to start thinking about rebuilding, about disaster preparedness, and changing how our communities, how our cultures work. We need to think about like, okay, several times a year we may have a flood. What does that mean? What do we need to change in our lives? This is a really good illustration by Scandinavian, who created a vision of a library lifeboat, which goes from a community to community and shows people some movies, works as a local community center. But you can see that the community here has been flooded. And this is something which may happen. If you look at actual maps from IPCC, we will see a lot of coastal communities flooded, if not permanently, because a lot of people think about them, oh, the sea is rising very slow. We will have a lot of places flooded several times a year, and those are happening within the next 5, 10, 15 years. So our life will need to adjust to that. Same with desertification, same with a lot of other things. So imagining how we will respond long term to those disasters is pretty important. The next one, and something which is very rare in art, is properly acknowledging that we need solidarity and not charity. We need to acknowledge that we are part of those systems. Oh no, the slides are lagging. If you could,
Um,
you should be able to skip them yourself. So if you could
it
go
looks like
to,
it's adjusted now.
okay, okay. So I'm sorry. So solidarity and not charity. Thinking about ourselves as parts, as a part of uh, of the communities affected, because even if something is not happening within our direct community, we are still affected, and we shouldn't be above it and just sending some handouts or doing volunteerism, just coming somewhere and just showing that, hey, I can do something, but actually feeling a part of a community where we can help people, being a part of community within, like, with our skills, however whatever they are, and not just someone who stands on the side and sends something. The next slide is seeing a community instead of heroes. Because going with this theme, it may be easy to imagine just a group of awesome firefighters, or imagining a group of people who will be going from place to place, and they will be the protagonists of the story. They will be saving community after community. But what we want to imagine really is how communities themselves will be responding to disaster, how they will, no matter who is the external specialist coming, they will be the people who can help themselves and each other. And I really like this visual symbol of just human chain or bucket chain, people just in line helping each other carry something from place to place, because this is such a powerful symbol, even if this is not always needed nowadays, because we have other ways of organizing uh, disaster response. So thinking about communities, and within those communities, not everyone needs to drop whatever they're doing and take a shovel. We can have different functions. If somebody is a great organizer, their skills will be as important during a disaster. If someone knows how to set radio infrastructure, if someone knows how to cook, if someone knows how to identify plants, this is as important. So seeing
Mhm.
those real skills and not only focusing on some group of uh, external characters. Also, something that I find very important is focusing on people and not just technology. Because with Solarpunk, we want to imagine something which is at least a little bit futuristic, but we don't want to have only floating buses and drones replacing firefighters. We want to imagine how people behave, how communities work, how cultures work. And we want to really show the technology only as an enabler of those communities, behaving in a way, organizing in a way where we are not focused on an awesome new kind of drone. We are focused on how community came up to create that technology which is needed. I wrote an essay some time ago which is called Technology as a Crystallized Community, that may help. I probably should link it as well. But seeing this, that
That sounds
we
good,
want to
yeah.
tell, yeah, we need to show stories about people, not just about awesome devices. Okay, so the next slide and real examples. Are the slides going properly?
Yes, there's a slight delay, but yes.
Okay. So, most importantly, there is a great book which can be a great foundation for everything here, which is called A Paradise Built in Hell by Rebecca Solnit. And this is a book about, I think, five different real cases where the solidarity arose from people, despite coming from multiple capitalist and really cynical societies, but how solidarity arose and how they build small, equal utopias by helping each other, by recognizing that they don't have anybody but each other. And if you want to start looking within the topic, I think this book, which is based on real stories, is really a great starting point. Uh, Going through real organizations, uh, you will probably find a lot of relief organization around the world. But something that I find very interesting is CADUS, the International Disaster Response, which has that really good poster with a lot of symbols by Marcus Wende, and they are essentially both a disaster response organization, but they also do a lot of trainings and they have their own makerspace. So they are a research organization creating open technologies for other and for their own disaster response. They have their own emergency vehicles in a lot of places around the world, including Palestine, including Ukraine, but also they do a lot and a lot of trainings. So this is something where if you want to imagine a community working with anybody that gives trainings or working with any kind of realistic technology, they have a lot of good materials. The next one, and something that I really like in this context, is citizen science. And this one here is specifically Safecast. Safecast is essentially a Geiger counter measuring radiation, but it has a GPS module and it can create a map of radiation. And those devices are very easy to use. They were created fully open source, open hardware after the Fukushima Daiichi uh, nuclear incident, and they helped people map the whole danger zone independently from the government. It gave the power to the people who showed that the government has created, like, has established the exclusion zone, which did not exactly follow the radiation uh, area. And since then, it's been used around the world because everybody can build or can build their own device or join the network. And it is really nice idea of imagining how we can include people, whether you imagine a school trip with everybody having a similar device, essentially mapping their area, or somebody just taking one for a forest trip to update the readings. Having different kinds of such devices may be really important, for Solarpunk future. And if you read any Solarpunk fiction book, their devices like this may pop up a lot because we can imagine people actually being invested in the well-being of their ecosystems, and measuring how the ecosystems behave is a responsible thing to do. The next one is very much about community during and after a disaster. And this is an organization called Communiter. Currently, their main webpage is down if you look for them, but on the at Collab site, I linked the historical webpage. This is a network of disaster tool libraries, which assumes that, hey, we shouldn't come and try to just save people after the very initial disaster. We should allow them to start saving themselves. We should allow them to decide what they need instead of giving them what we think they need. We should actually allow them to rebuild the way they want to and the way they need to, instead of establishing a plan for the rebuilding of Haiti or Nepal, somewhere in Washington or Geneva. So, Communiter is a network of a few such makerspaces to libraries, which may not have the quantity to give people like everyone the tools, but this is one of the hubs for education. This is one of the hubs for prototyping, which allows people to come up with ways of how to resolve some problems and how to start building so that local artisans can now replicate a lot of those solutions. So I think they had at least four big hubs uh, a few years ago. The next one is the Hermes radio, and this is about the communication systems. This is high frequency emergency and rural multimedia exchange system, essentially allowing a very cheap solar powered radio for a lot of remote communities around the world. It was started for the Amazon rainforest region, but the idea is that independently from all of the big projects, people should be able to build their own networks, and those networks should also be available even if the big infrastructure fails. It started by Rhizomatica, which is a really interesting organization if you want to read about their outreach programs in several different areas. The next one is the Tolokar, which is a project running in the Ukraine. This is very similar to Communiter, but instead of being one established place, this is a bus which goes over multiple regions and helps people learn new tools, learn new skills, and come up with prototypes of what is needed uh, whenever they need to do something. And especially with the idea with Ukraine, let's remember that we are not always talking about just the hot war zones. We are also talking about a lot of infrastructure which is needed by the refugees internally, and being able to support a refugee camp. This is a really hard question, like hard something hard to probably depict, but imagining how to support infrastructure if a lot of people suddenly moved from one part of the country to another, this is a really non-trivial problem, and we need a lot of engineering research, a lot of humanitarian coordination in order to be able to give people living conditions. So stories like this, symbols like this are also very, very important. And going further, if you want to imagine what skills are needed during disasters, think about like how different, like what different ways you can interact with, in what different ways you can interact with the world, where it's not only whatever you do for your day job, but how plant identification and knowing the actual medicinal plants uh, is important, how the first aid and medicine is important, but also the electrical engineering, the food preservation and storage, water purification, sewing, ham radio, or just navigation, compass, map reading, sky reading. But also, if you know your city, your region, being able to navigate and understand where are different things or parts of infrastructure within your city, those are invaluable skills. If you want even more ideas, I have a few books and a fictional story linked within the story seed library page. But we already have a few story seeds which specifically focus on different aspects of disaster preparedness, response, and relief. So take a look at those. Another illustration for Scandinavian from Scandinavian. So huge thank you for that. And just wrapping it up, the touchstones get inspired by real stories, contrast hope with adversity, imagine living with disasters, Think about solidarity and not charity. Think about community instead of heroes, and focus on people, not just the technology. Uh, so this is not a contest. There are no winners. Everybody who participates and works with other is a winner by sharing something, by building the knowledge together. You can work on submissions together and with different specializations, with different skill sets. I think this would work well. We have a few people on the Discord channel that on the Discord server that are really good experts on multiple topics. You can use your own OC, and there's a link to the StorySeed library page, but it's also linked under the stream. And I think that's it for my presentation.
Thank you so much, Paul, for your contribution to this project. I'm really, really looking forward to how people bring it together. I really want to emphasize that line as well, solidarity, not charity, because I think that is the ethos that should underlie all of the art that we see in this collaboration. I appreciated a lot of the specific examples that you had used of citizen science and all the particular practices taking place around the world. I want to remind everyone as well that, when we are approaching Solapunk and Solapunk art, yes, a lot of the things that fall into that category lean more in that kind of sci-fi direction. But I do want to encourage people to, ground their work as much as possible in things that people can apply today, here and now, and to also think critically about the technologies that we do use and their impact, because technology really is never neutral. Real quick, I just wanted to go through the specific submission guidelines available on the website, which is linked in the description, by the way. The description reads, "Welcome to the 2026 edition of the Collaborative Solarpunk Art Project. This year's theme is disaster preparedness, response, and relief, focusing on finding hope, connection, and meaning when facing natural and human-made calamities. The goal of the project is to welcome everyone to collaborate together, share ideas, and get inspired by each other's works. As Paolo just said, this is not a contest. There are no prizes and no winners outside of everything we learn from each other and the visions of a better world we create." The submission guidelines are as follows. All entries must be submitted by or before the 30th of June 2026. Artists may submit as many pieces as they'd like. In fact, the more the merrier. Artwork may be traditional or digital, but we're looking at digital paintings or renders, traditional paintings or drawings of that nature. Traditional artwork must be digitally scanned, not photographed. Artwork must not be AI generated or contain AI elements, be it backgrounds, textures, etc. And we may ask you to tell us about your research process or share some progress pictures. Artwork must be colorized. Artwork may not depict anything of a not safe for work nature. All artwork must pertain to the theme, disaster preparedness, response, and relief. The guidelines linked below. Artwork must be submitted to the email address curator@storyseedlibrary.org with the subject Solarpunk Art 2026. A brief description of the work would be appreciated. Now, previous collaborations, the art would have been sent to my email, but that's changing this year as we kind of build up the collaboration. We have an email address specifically for that art now, so you could send it to, once again, curator@storyseedlibrary.org with the subject Solarpunk Art 2026. Submitted artwork should be licensed under Creative Commons by 4.0 or Creative Commons by SA 4.0, and you can learn about those, they're linked on the website as well. Submitted artwork may be included in a live stream on the main channel and video on the side channel, as well as being published on Tumblr and on the Storyseed library. By submitting artwork, you consent to your work being shared in this manner with due credit. We reserve the right, of course, to decline submissions. An artist should include what, if any, credit they would like to have included in the final showcase. So I would have read these theme guidelines earlier, but you can go through, check out all the different touchstones we would have mentioned that Power would have included in his presentation. Some of the skills you might want to consider, some of the resources that Power mentioned in his presentation. We also have story seeds from the Story Seed project, and we have various other links of some of the videos that I've done that may be relevant to this project. Right. So, as we kind of wrap up the presentation and the announcement here, I wanted to address what I believe is a challenge and an opportunity with this theme. What we've been hammering throughout this live stream is that disaster preparedness, response, and relief can be presented in a way that is grim and hopeless. You know, it can be something that is tragic and sad. But we chose this theme and we meditated on this theme because we really want to consider, as these inevitable calamities unfold through this year and beyond, how those of us who are inspired by Solapunk can bring that inspirational message to this real context the people are living within. You know, how we can engage with the grief of this moment while still being empowering and hopeful. You know, we're not going to be painting over tragedy with sunshine and rainbows, but we want to look at how we can build on top of tragedy and how we can prepare before tragedies arise and unfold. We want to consider how those most impacted can be treated not as victims, but as collaborators, as people with agency. We consider things like inclusion, that we consider things like accessibility, and that we remember, because, you know, this is an anarchist focused channel, that a sufficiently advanced disaster preparedness and response program is indistinguishable from a revolutionary counterpower. And that's a quote from anarcho-occultism, anarcho-occultism.org, particularly their article on disaster anarchism, an argument against insurrection. That, I believe, should also be linked, but if it's not, I'll drop it in the chat as well. Thank you all for tuning in to this stream. Thank you very much to alxd for all the work that they've done on the Story Seed library and just constantly giving me inspiration and ideas and support and encouragement. And really, these art collaborations likely would not have continued if not for his work, for his contributions to this project. And so I want to give him his flowers, and I want to give all the artists that have contributed so far their flowers. And I ask that, you know, you continue to be a part of this work that we're doing and join us in imagining futures where communities are prepared, where they're resilient, where the horizon of possibilities has been expanded. Thank you all. Thank you, alxd.
Thank you so much, and thank you all the artists. We have so many wonderful submissions, and I am so grateful for everyone who decided to share their work. Like, I am so deeply impressed. Really, thank you.
I concur. And as always, all power to all the people. Peace.